Thank you very much, Jeffrey Oliver.
I'd like to say thanks to the PACRAM conference and to all the students who put this together. This is it's cool to get to be in this environment with you guys today. Because it's about poetry, I'd like to just start with a poem here.
No one grumbles among the oyster clans, and lobsters play their bone guitars all summer. Only we, with our opposable thumbs, want heaven to be and God to come again. There is no end to our grumbling. We want comfortable earth and a sumptuous heaven. But the heron, standing on one leg in the bog, drinks his rum all day and is content.
So the last time we were here, just over 500 years ago, something happened that, depending upon who you ask, was either the beginning of the end for poetry or it provided a new way to experience poetry. This something was the confluence of the technologies that allowed the easy replication of written text and literacy. As text became more available, more people engaged with the written language and learned how to read, learned how to write, and learned how to be literate within their contemporary societies. Poetry, as we know, originated as an oral art form and evolved to include the modality of written language as well as spoken language. To hear poems read live at performance or recordings continue to provide a compelling experience of poetry. We also read poems as written language on the page, screen, or other physical surfaces. The production and distribution of these texts are a collaborative process among craft workers and artists who take a text and through design and production make books that employ specific typography, colors, textures, and sometimes illustrations. It was the ability to easily replicate written text and literacy that not only influenced the manner we experience poetry, but it also influenced the manner in which poems are created, allowing poetry to evolve. In other words, the emergent technologies of a given time should free poets to consider in new ways what makes a poem relevant for readers in their time. So how do we experience poetry? Language provides two semiotic modes, written language and spoken language. But what if we combine poetry with images or illustrations? This experience could be described or defined as multimodal. We experience the poetry through the modality of the language and the images through the modality of the visible. And what if we combine poems with music? Again, this creates for us, the listener, a multimodal experience. What if we combine all of these modalities into one media and present this as a poem? The experience would be multimedia, but where then is poetry realized? What I'm fascinated by is, will the experience inspire imagery in the listener, viewer, reader's imagination so that he or she will describe the experience as poetry or literature? It seems we're again at a confluence of technologies. These technologies that are becoming ubiquitous for our contemporary society provide a multimodal experience within a particular media, allows for the easy replication and distribution of this particular media, and there is a rising literacy and adoption rate for this media. What happens if we apply these technologies to the making and distribution of poems? What would we call this genre, these poems, that promise the possibility of a multimodal experience of poetry that somehow remains literary and is distributed and experienced via one medium? It's called video poetry, or video poetry, or video poem, all one word, film poem, motion poem, moving poem, film dash poem, film poetry, scenic poems, visible verse, and other names. So the confusion must come from the emergent nature of this genre, right? Not really. Most people agree that the practice of presenting poems via film or video in the United States began in 1912 with a film titled Manhattan. This poetry film, as it was called by its creators, was based on the poem of the same name by Walt Whitman and was directed and produced by Charles Sheeler and Paul Strand and is about 10 minutes in length. The poetry film presents the text of the poem on screen interspersed with images of Manhattan, New York. The film images of New York do not illustrate the narrative of the poem so much as provide a visual support layer for the text. The text of the poem was presented on the screen due to the technological constraint that films were silent then. Synchronous sound had not yet been invented. About the same time in France, in 1928, Man Ray directed what he called a cine poem titled Le Toit de Mer, based on a poem by Robert Desnos. Similar to Manhattan, Le Toit de Mer presented the text of the poem on the screen, though relied on the action in the film to provide narrative juxtaposition with the text of the poem, not unlike the experience of reading an illustrated Dr. Seuss book. The contemporary practice of making video poems is generally attributed to Tom CONVERGENCE, who in 1978, along with Andre Farkas and Ken Norris of the avant-garde Vehicule Poets, produced what he called a video poem, all one word, titled Sympathies of War. In his essay, Video Poetry, a Manifesto, CONVERGENCE defines video poetry as: video poetry is a genre of poetry displayed on a screen, distinguished by its time-based poetic juxtaposition of images with text and sound. In the measured blending of these three elements, it produces in the viewer the realization of a poetic experience. Presented as a multimedia object of fixed duration, the principal function of a video poem is to demonstrate the process of thought and the simultaneity of experience expressed in words, visible and audible, whose meaning is blended with, but not illustrated by, the images and the soundtrack. Like Roland Barthes presents in his essay, The Death of the Author, CONVERGENCE tests video poetry against the reader's or viewer's experience rather than the supremacy of the author. Heather Haley is a curator for the Visible Verse Video Poetry Festival, describes video poems as a wedding of word and image. Unlike a music video, the inevitable ubiquitous comparison, a video poem stars the poem rather than the poet. And Kurt HEINTZ of epoets.net explains that our extension of video into poetry seems only to ratify a deeper understanding, as poets and performers, that poetry rests in a continuous spectrum of expanded genres. Even in its most essential form, it demolishes the old assumption that page and poem are one. In multimodal discourse, the modes and media of contemporary communication, Gunther Kress and Theo van Leeuwen describe 4 practices of multimodal representation that I found helpful in my examination of video poems. These are discourse, design, production, and distribution. And I want quickly to apply Kress and van Leeuwen's model to the process of making a video poem. The first phase, discourse, is simply the idea phase, where the poet finds a line or image that inspires her imagination and begins to write and conceive the poem. The design phase is where the poem begins to reveal itself and the poet begins to consider how she might best engage the reader, listener, viewer's senses. Kress and van Leeuwen describe designs as the use of semiotic resources. The design phase is when a poet will begin making decisions about how, as CONVERGENCE says, to blend images and soundtrack with the text in a measured way, whether to present the text on the screen or as narration, what music might support the text, and what images or video might support the text, and how these will interact and blend with one another. I want to briefly talk about the common modes of video poems here, because understanding these forms during the design phase will help the poet's decision-making process. These are different ways that we experience video poems. Some are implemented as kinetic typography or kinetic text, recording or live performance, so just kind of documentation, poem slideshows, video slideshows. We see these on the ADN homepage quite a bit. Motion illustrated poems, and then actual just video poems. The production phase is the organization and the expression of the production phase is the organization of the expression to the actual material articulation of the semiotic event or artifact. In other words, this is where the poem will be made physical as the poet implements her design using various technologies for capturing and recording audio and video and editing these together. Authorship of video poems, in the way that we consider literary authorship, becomes muddied during this phase because of the multimodal video poem. Because very often a poet will not have the necessary skills to shoot and or edit video, but will provide the design inspiration to someone else who does have this experience. In order for the poem to be presented as a video poem, poets often collaborate with other artists and musicians. In this respect, making a video poem is similar to writing, directing, and launching a theatrical work. Conversely, there are people who seem to have no end of creative talent and who can write a poem and then fully realize and produce the poem as a video poem without the technical assistance of others. And these are called multi-skilled artists, or assholes, depending on how you look at it. The pianist and recording artist Glenn Gould gets at this very idea of both collaborative authorship and emergent multi-skilled artists in his 1966 essay titled The Prospects of Recording. With respect to the relationship between a composer and a recording engineer, he writes, "It may well be that the effect of editorial afterthought upon performance, which is the decisions made by a recording engineer in this case, will breed a new type of technician cum performer whose realizations of the diagrammatic intention will be just as essential to the reputation of a composer as was the devotion of an itinerant virtuoso in early times. Autocracy, then, as a description of the composing process in the electronic age, may simply suggest the possibility that the composer will become involved in some portion of each procedure through which his intention will be made explicit in sound. As this part of that convergence of this is part of the convergence of technologies that we're experiencing today. With a laptop and very inexpensive software, a relative novice technician has the ability to record, create, edit audio and video. The final step in realizing a video poem is its distribution. Kress and Van Leeuwen separate distribution from production because the distribution method of a multimodal artifact does not change or influence its meaning. For example, a video is a video whether it is streamed via the web to a computer or played in a DVD on a television screen. Of course, this does contradict the Blu-ray ads that you get on rented movies. I think that this model allows us to view the possibility of video poems as an emergent literary experience. It also provides poets a clear workflow process of how to take a poem from the page to a multimodal literary experience called a video poem. So exactly where can one find video poems? You can discover video poems poking around on video sharing websites like YouTube and Vimeo, but these are difficult to find in search. YouTube does not have a category for video poems and their drop-down menu when you're uploading a file, so you'll have to be creative with that. Someone at a conference I was at recently said that they just put all of theirs in the nonprofit category because they're not making money off of it. Dave Bonta is a guy who really digs video poems, and he curates the movingpoems.com website. He culls through videos on YouTube and Vimeo and publishes these on his website, movingpoems.com. If you have a video poem that you'd like to have published, this may be a possible venue for you. Dave only publishes poems that are publicly available on video sharing websites. Poet and UAA MFA graduate Todd Boss and video animator Angela Kasube founded the motionpoems.com. So we've got movingpoems.com and motionpoems.com. They founded motionpoems.com website in 2008. The video poems found here are all professionally designed and produced. The Robert Blythe poem that we saw at the beginning was produced by their company Motion Poems. They do not take submissions, so don't try to submit anything there. Their mission is to connect literary presses with digital video animators in order to create video poems of the highest production quality possible. They're kind of viewing what they do as making trailers for books. As you know, there's a lot of money in poetry books, and so everything we can do to promote them is good, right? The Continental Review is at thecontinentalreview.com. Publishes video poems along with other topics in poetry and video. And they publish everything in video format only. Their website states that the Continental Review aims to be a forum for video readings of new poetry, a forum for diverse poetic, cinematic, multimedia experiences, and a forum for video interviews, film discussions on poetics. And so that's another really cool site because they do have essays as well as the production of video poems. So there's a lot of good stuff there. And then the Zebra Poetry Film Festival in Berlin is the premier video poetry festival in the world. And you can view the top video poems produced every year at zebra-award.org. I would like to suggest that the more we find ourselves at computer screens and tethered to mobile devices, the more we should expect to find poetry in these environments. You'll find that they fit nicely in so many places, like that 7 minutes before a department meeting, or on your smartphone while you're waiting for a bus. So expect poetry when you're at a computer and press play poem.